I've built a pedal board specifically for classic Marshall tones. Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett, and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about what I have put together for a custom pedal board specifically to run with classic Marshalls and emphasize the great tones. Now, this is not a modeling board. This is not like using an amp in a box pedal to try and create Marshall tones. It's pedals that are supposed to work with the classic Marshall sound, meaning a Marshall amp or a Marshall style amp, to try and emulate some of those old tones with a couple of modern tweaks thrown in. For those of you that follow my channel, you might know I have done this before. This is my second video in this series. The first pedal board that I put together was for a Princeton Reverb, kind of a small pedal board for a smaller amplifier. Which already brings up an interesting point about this, because the majority of the time I have used that Princeton-specific pedal board in real life has been with other amps, not the Princeton. The interesting point is that, yeah, it's just a great pedal board. Obviously, the purpose of it is to really work with a great amp and get some specific tones, but that's not to say that it can't work with anything. The impetus for doing this series of videos is doing review work and also being someone who's, if I do say so myself, a fairly savvy trader, collector of guitar gear. I have put together quite a little collection of amplifiers and pedals specifically, doing pedal reviews and working with a lot of companies and, you know, getting pedals for reviews and trading some and buying some and all kinds of things. The thing is that I wound up with shelves of pedals that weren't getting played. Pedals that I love, you know, because they don't always fit on a board together, right? You know, some of my pedals that are some of my favorite pedals, well, maybe they don't integrate well with a certain amp that I'm using more, or maybe they don't fit in with these other pedals that I'm using it with. And I don't like the idea of pedals just sitting on a shelf collecting dust. So I thought, why don't I start putting together pedal boards that are geared specifically towards certain amps. So the amplifier that we're using today is my Marshall Bluesbreaker. This is the 212 JTM45, and it is loaded with ToneSpeak speakers. And I absolutely love this amplifier, and I love some of the classic tones associated with early Marshall amplifiers. So let's dive right in. You've just heard a kind of a smattering of tones there. Obviously, the one that you can see from the little teaser shots there, yeah, it's a Vox wall. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. That aside, there are two pedals that I want to start talking about, just to kind of give you the basis of the tone, because these are two pretty much always on pedals for me. One is the One Control Prussian Blue Reverb, and the other is the Catalan Bred Belle Epoque, which I am running at 18 volts, I want to mention. I think this pedal sounds a lot better on 18 volts than it sounds on 9 volts. Now, I'm not using either of them particularly heavy. The reverb I've just got on a little bit to give me some air, and then the Catalan Bred, I'm just using it as kind of a slight boost and slap back, and I use those at the end of my chain, so we're kind of working our way backwards, but then we're going to start at the beginning again anyway. So let's hear a nice clean tone with just these subtle effects on so you can hear kind of where my basis is. Now I do also want to mention I am using a Korg Pitch Black tuner. on this pedal board. Next on the list is a pedal that I have a bit of a history with. This is the brand new one, but I have a history with this circuit. This is the new Way Huge Red Llama. This is the Mark III Smalls Edition. Now I'm using this one for a very, very light overdrive, something that gives me a nice kind of fat dynamic, and to simulate the idea basically of this amplifier being turned up a bit louder and getting its own edge of breakup tone. At lower settings, it's a very natural sounding overdrive and kind of gives me that great edge of grit, but without sounding too thin. It really kind of sounds nice and fat. Now I've got a bunch of dirt on this. I do want to mention, if you're running a different amp, if you're trying to kind of emulate this idea that I'm doing today, if you're using something like a DSL or some other various Marshall where you're using already kind of an edge of grit sound, you could certainly cast one of these overdrives off. I've got a lot of dirt on this board. First of all, Marshall is known for a lot of dirt. Second of all, I play this amp entirely clean. It's an extremely loud amp, and even I played it at a fair recently on a big outdoor stage. And on that big outdoor stage, I was not able to turn it up loud enough to get it to break up. That's just how loud it is. So I am using pedals for the entirety of the dirt, but again, if you are running off of something that's already a little dirty, you probably wouldn't need quite so much. But let's hear how this Red Llama sounds. Now, the guitar that I'm using today is a Gibson Firebird 5 loaded with Righteous Sound Bluebird pickups, and we're going into the pedal board, into the amplifier. Next up, classic Marshall. You cannot do classic Marshall without fuzz. And two of my favorite British guitar players are Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, and both of them were famous for using the tone bender fuzz. Now, I thought about selling this pedal and retiring in Malibu because of the prices, am I right? However, I decided to keep it. Next on the list is the full tone soul bender. All right, next up we have another overdrive. This is actually one of my very favorite overdrive pedals ever out there. It's absolutely love it, and I am using it for a fatter, smoother, overdriven tone. Not too much breakup, because I am jumping it off of the Red Llama, and it creates a really beautiful, smooth, rich, kind of silky overdrive. When you turn it back, it gets kind of a Zen Drive character, and it just really works. This is the Vic Audio Tree of Life, so let's have a listen to this. Next up, we're going to get a little fancy. We're going to use a workstation pedal. This is one of the great workstation pedals out there and is a tone synonymous with classic Marshall. Next, we have the Keeley Monterey. Now, this is clearly a Hendrix-inspired pedal, and I do want to mention that I'm not going for a straight-up Hendrix tone when I use this. It is definitely in the realm of, it's an inspired by, but for those of you who are really into Hendrix, you'll go, it's not quite, it's certainly not like you turn this on the way I'm using it and be like, oh wow, it's Jimmy City Central. It's not like that. I'm also using a Firebird today. However, this pedal just works. It gives me more of a slender and aggressive fuzz tone, and for the modulation side of it, I am using the Univibe. It just sounds absolutely phenomenal and gives me a really cool 60s flavor of rock guitar tone. So let's have a listen to the Keeley Monterey. Going down the line, we have another Keeley pedal, another Rob Keeley pedal. This one is very special to me because this amplifier I got right before one of my daughters was born, and this pedal right after that. And when I first did a review of this pedal, it was into this amp, kind of a new rig for me right around when one of my daughters was born. Next up, we have the Keeley Super Fat Mod. Now for this, I'm not using a lot of drive from it. I'm using it mostly as kind of a brighter boost to really just kind of glue everything together and punch it forward, and this just works beautifully to add a tiny bit of grit and really thrust everything forward in a way that works beautifully in a band setting. So let's take a listen to the Super Fat Mod. Now we have more modulation. Now I'm not a huge modulation player. Many of you who watch my channel know it's not the biggest kind of avenue for me to go down. However, there are a couple of must-haves for me. Now when I think classic Marshall tone, the first one that pops into my mind is Eric Clapton. I'm a huge Eric Clapton fan, and his tones with Cream have just been some of the most inspiring that I've ever heard. And obviously this being the Bluesbreaker amp, that's an amplifier named after Eric Clapton's use in John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers. Now, the one modulation effect that Clapton has pretty much been associated with is using a Leslie cabinet. Well, believe it or not, I don't have an actual Leslie cabinet. I know, maybe I'm not hardcore, but no, I don't have an actual Leslie cabinet. What I do have is the Tech 21 Roto Choir. This is unfortunately an out-of-production pedal. I think Tech 21 should definitely bring it back. This is a great Leslie simulator pedal. It actually does its own cab sim, which I'm not using, and it does two different voicings. Really great Leslie tone. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like with the Leslie speaker, and then also with some grit for some really classic Eric Clapton that some of you will recognize. Now lastly, I got one more Rob Keeley pedal on this because they just work for it. Now this is where I am departing a little bit from the classic tone. I have the Keeley Halo on as a second delay pedal to use, whereas the Catalan Bread I'm kind of using as an always on just to give me a little bit of a punch and slap. The Halo I'm using for a big, wide ambient tone. Interestingly, with it being a dual delay, it almost sometimes gives the vibe of it sounding like it's in a big hall, kind of with like a reverb bouncing around. It's an interesting delay pedal where when you are playing, it has almost a reverb quality to it. So I think it really works with this Marshall sound. You already heard that a little bit at the beginning. Now let's hear what it can do. the subject of departing slightly from classic Marshall tones, doing something a little bit more modern with a touch of ambience to it, let's take a listen to that again. We are going to listen to the halo and also use the univibe effect from the Monterey, so you can really hear how expansive this can be. And even though this pedal board works great for classic Marshall tones, it also works great for some really cool modern tones. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Jack Fossett. Let us know, have you ever built a custom pedal board with one amp particularly in mind? Are you like me and then you use it with other amps as well? This one, I will say, I actually have used with Marshall amplifiers. The several times that I've used it live, I have used it either with the Bluesbreaker or with my Marshall JVM, which is new to my collection, and that's just really great. But I use that for classic tones. I don't really use it for the modern, heavier gain tones. What would you put together for a classic Marshall pedal board? What would be your must-haves? Please let us know in the comments. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Wow.